Now we're going to start this Bible study with a Bible verse, 1 Peter 3:15, where Peter admonishes us to always be prepared to give an answer for the hope that we have. Now, in today's increasingly secular, godless society, our culture is woefully ignorant of what the Bible teaches. So we cannot just go to the Bible to explain the hope that we have. We have to do some extra biblical reasoning to pique their interest to where they might think that the Bible perhaps has something pertinent to say. Our culture knows enough about the Bible to know that God is opposed to the notion of gender fluidity. The Bible makes it clear God made us male and female. Gay marriage is nothing ever thought of in the mind of God. He made us male and female. He made us to marry. Man marries a woman, woman marries a man. Man doesn't marry a man, woman does not marry a woman. And Proverbs chapter 6, verses 16 to 19 lists a lot of things, several things that God hates. One of those is the shedding of innocent blood. You don't get much more innocent than a baby in her mother's womb, and you don't get much bloodier than abortion. So we can't jump right to the Bible in explaining to people the hope that we have. We have to do some extra biblical reasoning. Many, if not all of you, know that Ashby, Meg, and I were converted out of the Crossroads movement in the late 70s. By any other name, Crossroads was a cult. That is a picture of the Crossroads Church of Christ building in Gainesville, Florida. I was actually baptized at that building on a Wednesday night, May 3rd, 1978. That summer, 78, I went up to visit my mother in Blakely, Georgia. That's a picture from the summer of 78 when I was a young man of 28 years old. And it's true, men do get better looking with age. Now, when I was there, I went to the Blakely Church of Christ, and at that time they didn't have a preacher. So the following summer, I drove up from Gainesville, Florida to visit my mom again. And when I was in the Blakely Church of Christ building, I bumped into this young man. I said, "Did they find a preacher yet?" And he said, "I'm the preacher." And that young man was Clayton Hartline, and he and I have been very good friends ever since. And you would be hard-pressed to find anyone who loves Jesus more than Clayton or his wife, Debbie. So Clayton and I hit it off quite well, so I said, "Hey, how about the following summer, the summer of 80, I come up and help you with the church, lead Bible studies, door knock, I'll do anything you want me to do." And he said, "Sure, that'd be great." So the summer of 80, I went back up there to visit my mom and worked with Clayton. So we heard of some fellow was preaching what they used to call gospel meetings in a place called Hentown, Georgia. As you can imagine, it was a sprawling metropolis. So we went to hear this guy. And the whole time, his entire message was blasting Crossroads. It was all I could do to contain myself, to not run up to that man and, in Christian love, punch him in the nose. But I managed to contain myself. I think Clayton helped me out a little bit. But as soon as he finished speaking, I went right up to the podium, and I said, and Clayton reminded me of this in a text a couple weeks ago, I said to this man, "I'm the often heard of but seldom experienced crossroader, and everything you said this morning is a lie, and I want you to apologize." So this fellow said, everything I said was a lie. He said, "I don't think anything I said was a lie." He said, "But I could be wrong. And if you can prove me wrong, I'll be glad to apologize to whomever I need to." He said, "How about we do this? How about we get together and we can discuss what I talked about this morning?" I said, "That's fine with me." So a couple of days later, I got a call from that man. Neither Clayton or I can remember his name. And he said, "How about we meet at the Church of Christ, Blakely Church of Christ building?" I said, "That'd be great." We set a time. He said, can I bring a couple people with me? I said, the more the merrier. I want to straighten you folks out about what Crossroads is all about. So we met. So in that room were 8 people altogether. It was me and Clayton and 6 others, 4 of whom were preachers. And one of the preachers had been a Crossroads camp from the Crossroads movement, a campus minister from Tallahassee, Florida State. So the fellow that had done the gospel meeting, the man that I challenged, after we did our introductions, he said, I understand that you don't think the Christians at the Blakely Church of Christ love Jesus. I said, yeah, well, that's pretty obvious. He said, you base that on what? I said, well, the church is so tiny. I mean, they got a handful of people. This place has been here forever. If they loved Jesus, they surely would have filled this little church building up by now. So he said, can I ask you a question? I said, sure, that's why I'm here. And he said, how many people were saved on the ark? I said, well, if you count Noah, there were 8 in all. Noah preached for a long time. Is that correct? I said, yeah, that's true. So Noah preached for a long time, yet only 8 people of all the people on planet Earth at the time that heard Noah's message were saved in the ark. I said, yeah. He says, help me understand something. By your definition, Noah was a loser. By your definition, he could not possibly have loved God, nor could God possibly have loved Noah. Is that correct? So I looked this guy dead in the eye, and I said, hama, 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 hama. There was no way I could answer that question. And I spent 4 hours being bombarded with those types of contradictions from those 4 preachers. Now, before we can talk about deprogramming the atheist, we need to understand a little bit about what brainwashing is. Brainwashing is said to reduce its subject's ability to think critically or independently, to not allow the introduction of new and unwanted ideas. So how did Crossroads brainwash me? How did they reduce my ability to think critically or independently? Crossroads focused almost entirely on evangelism. All the passages in the Bible that spoke of evangelism, they focused on, or Bible passages that supported evangelism, they focused on. They never branched out from that. Everyone in the Crossroads Church had blinders for evangelism. Hence, that man's ability to knock me off my feet by his question about Noah. My thinking hadn't been integrated. How did they not allow the introduction of new and unwanted ideas? When you got baptized at Crossroads, they assigned you a prayer partner. The prayer partner was basically a spy. He kept an eye on everything you did. He knew what you were reading, the people you were seeing, what you were studying at school. In fact, a great example, after I got back from my 4-hour beatdown by those preachers, Clayton had sent me an article about Crossroads, about it being a cult. So I opened the mail, and I'm reading it at the dining room table in the apartment I shared with 4 other guys from Crossroads. And I heard the door downstairs open, and I knew one of my roommates was coming up. So I panicked, and underneath the table where the leg met the table, I slid the article I was reading so I wouldn't be caught reading something that was contradictory to what Crossroads wanted me to read. Brainwashed. Now, how are atheists brainwashed? If you see this man in the white coat and the beaker and that nuclear emblem there, they are brainwashed because Our entire culture is basically indoctrinated in the philosophy of scientism. Basically speaking, scientism is the view that the hard sciences, like chemistry, biology, physics, astronomy, provide the only genuine knowledge of reality. So how does scientism brainwash the atheist? Well, to be a scientist is to be an evolutionist. If you've ever spoken with someone who's an evolutionist, they always say, oh, that's all settled. That's all settled science. And if the COVID pandemic taught us anything, it's how powerful scientism is in our culture. If you wanted to shut someone up in an argument, you said, I follow the science. If you wanted to shut them up, you called them a science denier. Do not allow the introduction of new and unwanted ideas. Anything other than evolution is not worth considering, because only science is how we know anything. Everything else, religion, is all just speculation. That's the philosophy of scientism. So what is deprogramming? To cause to abandon a rigid commitment to certain beliefs, values, etc., as those of a religious cult, by undoing the effects of indoctrination. I was many years removed from that 4-hour beatdown at the Blakely Church of Christ before I realized that those people had set that meeting up specifically to deprogram me. Now, deprogramming was just getting in vogue at this point in time, but that's exactly what they did. And the way you deprogram is precisely the way they did it. You show the person that what they claim to be true is contradictory. And that way you begin to open their minds to other possibilities. So just as was done to me in Blakely, Georgia, let's do that to the atheists this morning by deprogramming the atheists in two important areas: evolution and the origins of morality. So let's deprogram. First, it helps understand a little bit of what evolution is. In biology, evolution is the random change in the characteristics of a species over several generations and relies on the process of natural selection. Some of these characteristics may give the individual an advantage over other individuals, which they can then pass on to their offspring. Bird evolution. So you've got this little thing there at the bottom left, this lizard kind of creature. This lizard structure and all the functionality of that lizard type creature is determined by his genetics. This is neo-Darwinism. So this thing gives birth, and a genetic mutation happens randomly without any guidance. But it so happens that this mutation adds something to the organism that allows nature to, quote, select it for survival advantage. And on and on and on for millions of years until you have the evolution of flight. And flight is a very effective survival attribute. That bird would have a hard time running on its two legs to get away from that cheetah. That cheetah is not going to get hold of that bird once he gets high enough in the air. So flight, nature would, quote, select flight because it offers a survival benefit. Now this is a picture of 216 pennies. Why 216? You'll find out in a moment. If I were to take you into a room, and on the floor of that room were scattered 216 pennies, all heads, and I asked you a question. I said, if you answer correctly, you live; incorrectly, you die, because I want you to be serious about your answer. I show you, I walk in this room, we've got 216 pennies scattered on the floor, all heads. Choice 1, I took those 216 coins and threw them as hard as I could against the wall, and they all landed heads. Or choice 2, I took those coins, threw them as hard as I could against the wall, and the ones that weren't showing heads, I turned to show heads. And as Jeremy likes to say, think about that. Now I got to do a very little math refresher. If you got past 8th grade, you won't have any trouble. I do nothing in this other than multiplication and division. So given a fraction A over B, A is given a name, it's called the numerator, B is called the denominator. Examples, 1/3, 1/100th, 1/1000th. What's the numerator? 1 in all of those. What's the denominator? 3, 100, 1000. And as is obvious, again, going back to 8th grade arithmetic, if you have a fraction, the larger the number gets in the bottom, the larger the denominator, the smaller the overall fraction. So 1/10 is less than 1, right? 1/100th is less than a tenth of something. 1/1000th is less than a hundredth of something. On and on and on. So instead of writing 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 a bazillion times, we came up with some notation called exponential notations. It's symbolized in different ways, but one way I could do it on my Word document or PowerPoint was 10 with that little caret symbol to the K. That just means 10 to the kth power. It's notation and nothing only. So 10 times 10, we can write it as 10 to the power of 2, or 10 caret 2, which is 100. 10 times 10 times 10 is 10 to the third. 10 times 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 10 is 10 to the 8th, or 1 followed by 8 zeros. But instead of writing all those zeros out and all those 10s in multiplication, it's just shorthand notation. And if you have exponents, there are certain rules they have to follow. So if you multiply two exponential numbers together, like 10 to the x times 10 to the y, you just add the exponents. So 10 to the 5th times 10 to the 3rd is just 10 to the 5 plus 3, or 10 to the 8. If you divide them, you subtract exponents. 10 to the x divided by 10 to the y is equal to 10 to the x minus y. 10 to the 5th divided by 10 to the 3rd is 10 to the 5 minus 3, or 10 to the 2, or 10 squared. Nothing but notation. Now, based on research by Douglas Axe and his colleagues, molecular biologists at Cambridge, in order for evolution to even begin, we have to have the first evolvable life form, right? Natural selection needs life forms to select. So we have to first get to an evolvable life form. And in order to do that, we first have to get a protein. Without protein, there is no life. So based on calculations he and some others did, the probability of getting a functional protein ranges between 1 and 10 to the 77th, or 1 and 10 to the 65th. 1 divided by 1 followed by 77 zeros, or 1 divided by 1 followed by 65 zeros. So we're going to use the larger probability. We're going to give the evolutionists his greatest chance of getting that first protein and ultimately the first life, which is capable of evolving. So we use 1 divided by 10 to the 65th, which is pictured here. And the reason I had 216 coins I tossed in that room is because that probability is the exact same probability, close to it, of tossing 216 coins and all of them landing heads. Now here's a little more division, a simple statistical fact, not rocket science. I can understand it. So if you have an experiment that can occur in one of n ways, in order to have a better than even chance of getting a particular outcome x, you must perform the experiment on average or in general n times. How many sides does a die have? Your standard die has 6 sides. So if I want to toss that die and have better than an even chance of seeing a 4, how many times do I have to throw it? 6 times. If I have a 10-sided die and I want to have a better than even chance of seeing that 4, how many times do I have to throw it? 10. If I have a 1,000-sided die, I want to have a better than even chance of seeing that 4, how many times do I have to throw it? 1,000. Again, not rocket science. Frank could understand. So recall, our 1 to n probability of getting all 216 pennies to be heads, or equivalently getting our first functional protein, is 1 divided by 1 followed by 65 zeros. So what's our n in this particular problem? Our n is the guy on the bottom, right? 1 divided by n. So 1 followed by 65 zeros. So if I want to get all heads when I toss 216 coins, I need to toss those 216 coins 1 followed by 65 zeros times. Now, when you're confronted with such seemingly absurd numbers, the evolutionists invariably bring up the monkeys on a typewriter argument. I'm sure you've heard it. You get enough monkeys, enough typewriters, enough time, and they will type out perfectly Romeo and Juliet. So in our case, you get enough monkeys, enough time tossing 216 coins, we should be able to get all heads, and which would be equivalent to getting our first protein, which would then allow us to reach evolvable life. Let's see if this is the case. Let's put our monkeys to work. Now, in case you can't see that well, that's a bunch of monkeys at the desk, and one of the monkeys says, it might not be Shakespeare, but I just wrote a pretty good sonnet about bananas. So here's what we're going to do. We want to give the evolutionists a fighting chance. On every square inch of the surface of planet Earth, I'm going to put a little monkey. Each one of those monkeys, I'm going to give 216 little pennies. Every square inch of the surface of the earth, counting the oceans. I put a little monkey, I give each monkey 216 little pennies. I ask those monkeys to toss those pennies 1 million times a second. And I ask them to do that for 5 billion years. Now, the atheists say planet Earth has been here 4.6 billion. We'll make it 5, give them an even greater chance. So remember, if we want to see all heads, a probability greater than 50%, if we want to be more than likely to see heads than not, we have to have 216 coins tossed, 1 followed by 65 zeros times. So let's let our monkeys start tossing coins. Now, square inches on Earth's surface, approximately 8 times 10 to the 17, so that's our number of monkeys. The seconds in a year is approximately 3 times 10 to the 7. 5 billion years is 5 times 10 to the 9 by definition. So seconds in 5 billion years is approximately 5 times 10 to the 9 times 3 times 10 to the 7 equals 15 times 10 to the 16. Multiplying, adding exponents, we get approximately 2 times 10 to the 17. So, monkeys throwing coins 1 million times a second for 5 billion years gives us 8 times 10 to the 17 monkeys times 1 million times the number of seconds in 5 billion years, multiplying, adding exponents, and that's the number we get at the bottom. Remember what they needed. They needed to toss those coins 1 followed by 65 zeros times if we were to be confident that we would see heads, all heads. They threw them that many times only. Those monkeys got a lot more coin tossing to do. In fact, in order to succeed, these monkeys would have to toss these coins 500,000 billion more times in order for us to have a better than 50% chance of seeing heads appear at least once. Sorry, monkeys. Sorry, evolutionists, among which I used to be one. Ain't gonna happen. Didn't happen. So back to the question I asked at the beginning. Your life depended on the correct answer. I take you into a room with 216 pennies scattered on the floor, and they're all heads, and I say, did I take those pennies and throw them and they landed that way? Or did I take those pennies and throw them, and after they landed, I took the tails and turned them up heads? I hope you answered wisely. Now, lots of people, when you look to Bible passages, the Bible names are confusing. Romans, Thessalonians, Galatians. They think they're dealing with something out of Star Trek. But these are just names of geographical locations that the letters happen to have been written to. Romans 1, actually the book of Romans was just the letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to the Christians in Rome in the first century. Later on, for convenience, people put chapters and verses to those letters. Paul, writing in Romans chapter 1, verse 20, said this, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." Now, I like to tease my evolutionist friends every once in a while and think of what I consider clever ways to get them to recognize the absurdity of their position. Other than showing it statistically, there are thought ways to get them to see how silly it is. So a couple of days ago, I was listening to Dido, and she sang a song, "A White Flag," beautiful song, and she's got a really unique and pretty voice. So I posted this on Facebook. For my evolutionist friends, who would have thought if you blew dirt around long enough, it could sing like this? Which caption would you say best captures this man's expression? Stop eating pistachio ice cream, or last warning, stay away from my daughter? Well, my daughter, Abra, is the Southwest Regional Director for the Center for Bioethical Reform, or CBR. She holds these genocide awareness projects. In fact, that group holds these genocide awareness projects all over planet Earth. They usually go to campuses and they put up this huge display of abortion victim photos. My daughter's always looking for volunteers to help her. I've done it a number of times. And if you'd like to know more about that, let me know. So they were holding one of these earlier this year at Arizona State University. And I talked with one of the friends of Abra, who often goes to the gaps. And he told me he did something like what I'm doing here. I got a sandwich board. I set it up. Abra and her crew, with a large crowd, was just several yards away. It says, "Former Christian ridiculing atheist, what changed? Ask me." So I had two chairs. I sat in one, and I had one for the folks that would come by and talk to me. I had several people who were Christians. They came by just to encourage me and thank me for being there. But most were atheists / evolutionists. So when they would come by and I'd ask them if they're evolutionists, they said yes. I would ask them one question: what are some things that anger you? They give me various answers. One girl I remember in specific, she said, discrimination angers me. I then help the student to understand, whoever it is I'm talking to, that anger always implies judgment. When you get angry at something, you are judging that as something that should not be taking place. And if you're angry at somebody, you're judging that they should stop whatever it is they're doing. Stop messing around with my daughter. You don't get mad at people for eating ice cream that you don't like. Anger, true anger, Rational anger always implies judgment. And judgment, of course, always requires a standard. We have to be judging people by some kind of a standard. So let's say you show the evolutionists that based on statistics, evolution is absolutely absurd and could not have happened. Let's say they don't care. They say, well, they'll figure it out someday. By the way, that's not science, that's speculation. But they may say that to you. Well, even if evolution is true, our standards of morality, those by which we judge others, are no truer than the quills of a porcupine. They aid in our survival and nothing more. But I don't want you to take my word for it. Here's a quote from Michael Ruse. He's a well-known atheist philosopher of science who specializes, of all things, in the philosophy of biology. And he said, morality is a biological adaptation, no less than our hands and feet and teeth and quills, I added that, considered as a rationally justifiable set of claims about an objective something. Ethics is illusory. I appreciate that when somebody says, love thy neighbor as thyself, they think they're referring above and beyond themselves. Nevertheless, such reference is truly without foundation. Morality is just an aid to survival and reproduction, and any deeper meaning is illusory. I'm sure most of you know or have heard of Richard Dawkins, probably the most famous atheist on planet Earth today. Despises God. He wrote this in the Scientific American in 1995. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. And a man named Justin Brierley, who has a podcast called Unbelievable, out of England, he does it, I believe. He was interviewing Dawkins. So Brierley said, but if we had evolved into a society in which rape was considered fine, would that not mean that rape is fine? Dawkins, I don't want to answer that question. It's enough for me to say that we live in a society where it's not considered fine. Brierley, okay, but ultimately, your belief that rape is wrong is as arbitrary as the fact that we evolved 5 fingers rather than 6. Dawkins, you could say that, yes. And Nancy Pearcey, writing in her 2010 book, Saving Leonardo, Dawkins was at a book signing event, and a young man came up to Dawkins and asked, if humans are machines, which Dawkins claims we are meat machines, if humans are machines and it is inappropriate to blame or praise them for their actions, then should we be giving you credit for the book you're promoting? Dawkins responded, I can't bring myself to do that. I actually do respond in an emotional way, and I blame people and I give people credit. The man said, but don't you see that as an inconsistency in your view? Dawkins replied, I sort of do, yes, but it is an inconsistency that we sort of have to live with. Otherwise, life would be intolerable. So Dawkins admits he has to pretend life is a different way than he claims to believe, or he couldn't tolerate living. That fellow in the lower left named Noah, I spoke with him over an hour. He's a philosophy major, a really smart guy. We had a great conversation. That fellow in the middle was an engineering student. I don't remember his name, but he was an evolutionist. So he said, no, I believe right and wrong is just culturally determined. So I said, do you ever get angry at things? And he said, yeah. I said, can't do that. Now you can get angry, but your anger is not rational. Because if evolution's true, There is no right and wrong. Everything we do is personal preference. So here's my life challenge to you. We'll probably never meet again. Every time you get angry, every time you watch TV and you hear about somebody who raped and murdered a 3-year-old, before you start getting angry, right when you start go, oh, I'm an evolutionist. I'm an atheist. I'm a scientist. I'm like Mr. Spock. I only use reason. What he is doing is not wrong. It is just different from what I enjoy doing. He likes pistachio ice cream. I don't. So I have to train myself to stop getting angry when I see such things that anger me. But is our anger legitimate? Is there more than what evolution claims? Well, Jesus in John 5 had the following to say. Do not be amazed at this, for a time is coming when all who are in their graves will hear his voice and come out. Those who have done what is good will rise to live, and those who have done what is evil will rise to be condemned. By myself I can do nothing. I judge only as I hear, and my judgment is just, for I seek not to please myself, but him, God, the Father, he's referring to, who sent me. So in summary, how do we deprogram the atheist? And in the process, elucidate on the hope that we have? Well, we show them that instead of mindless evolution, which could not possibly have created life, the Bible tells us that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Instead of amorality, no right and no wrong, if evolution were true, we show them that morality is grounded in God's eternal and unchanging nature. The passage we just looked at, John 5:28-30. And concerning Richard Dawkins' point about our universe being pitilessly indifferent, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that those who believe in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. This act of God can be described in many different ways, but pitiless indifference does not come to my mind. Thank you. And that is all I had prepared. It's too hard to hit exactly 45 minutes, so I hope maybe I came close. So, thank you.